Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Tech Tuesday. My guest today is Travis Peterson. He is the Chief Commercial Officer with Pontosense. Did I do that right, Travis?
Yep.
And they are using radar technology to do fall detections and other really cool things with residents in senior living communities. Before we get into our conversation, this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Travis, welcome to Tech Tuesday. Let's start with you just telling us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what you're passionate about, the problem, how you change the world, the problem you solve.
No, thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. Great to be on. Yeah, so I'm Travis Peterson. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer, so I'm really responsible for how we ultimately get all of our technology into the market, into the hands of the people that need it. And Pontosense, when we started our journey, we really, our first business was actually helping children in hot cars and being left behind in the automotive industry. And in that journey, we figured out that there were a lot of other applications of what we were doing, and we really landed on what we call age tech, right? So what we've done is really taken radar to something that 3-5 years ago wasn't really capable of doing, and we put it in a place that we now can enable what we say is bringing back dignity to the aging journey. So we really want to emphasize providing privacy around elderly, that aging journey. You're going through a really oftentimes emotional moment, transitioning either into home care, into facility base, and really trying to give people the tools to age safely at home if they can. But then if they have to go into a facility, bringing in a lot of those benefits to start to predict and even prevent further health decline to keep people as comfortable as they can for as long as they can.
Okay, terrific. So you have sensor technology, radar technology, so not cameras, right?
Correct.
And it sits inside a residence room, residence apartment, and what can it detect?
Yeah, so it's a very, very silent, if you will, approach. So what we see is we're measuring movement, right? So it's all different types of movement. And what we're seeing is, it's falls, of course. We can see if somebody is bending over to tie their shoe versus if someone actually has a fall, trips, lands on the ground. We send those alerts out to those who need it. But beyond that, we're understanding what they're doing. Are they sitting in a chair? Are they laying in bed? Are you in and out of the shower? How long are these activities happening? And we then put all that data together, and our AI behind the scenes creates a baseline. And we start to then track what all these trends mean, even down to the respiration levels during sleep. And that allows us to really understand individual behaviors and then ultimately be able to see what changes are happening on a daily, weekly basis as your health changes, as your behaviors change, and what those things can mean.
So talk to me a little bit about, so first off, actually, how long does it take to figure out what the baseline is?
Yeah, so we usually about a week is the first launch into that baseline. And then we start to track those changes, right? So it's important to take that time because everyone's behaviors are different. If you catch someone, that's already sick, we're able to see all of that and then understand, what makes them with their behavior.
So one of the things I always wonder about is you've got to have this right balance between, you don't want to have so many alerts that you've got fatigue for the caregivers, and or they you get into this cry wolf situation where you go in and there's nothing really wrong, and yet you also don't want to miss things. How do you balance that, and how do you figure that out?
It's a really important balance. Alert fatigue is something we talk about a lot at Pontosense. And part of the reason that we're able to do what we do so well is around some of our technology and how advanced our antenna arrays are compared to the market. So that allows you to really diminish the amount of false positives. When you look at in a care facility, just did a big study with us, they showed that we were actually 43% less false positives. And then over the course of their whole testing was 23 times less positives than the next best radar device on the market. So that's really the first piece, is making the tech good enough to do what the market needs it. The second piece becomes all the mechanisms by how you educate, you onboard, and train your staff to respond to these things, because there are alerts that can fool technology, right?
Right.
And even the convincing piece is actually more important often, because what we see with a lot of residents is they may have a mild fall and recover, and then the staff will check on them or ask them later, hey, did you have a fall today? And a lot of times the resident may even say, I didn't fall, right? So we have a whole customer success team that works with our partners then to help validate those things and train them and show that, hey, yes, this did happen. Here's the data. Here's why. And that, again, can help us give that confidence that you know that it wasn't a cried wolf, if you will.
Okay. So how does that, how am I asking this? How do caregivers get the alerts?
Yeah, so we have a professional dashboard. So oftentimes, like at a nurse call station or at an administration office with a care coordinator, for example, they have the ability to see all the residents that are under observation. They have the ability to get those notifications. But then we also, if you have a mobile phone and you have the app access, you can get those push notifications just for the residents you're responsible for your floor, for example. It's all customizable. Or in cases where maybe your staff doesn't have, a smartphone that's issued by the company, we can even do SMS alerts, which is quite common as well, to just push those critical alerts to the people that need them.
Got it. So let's say we have a 100-unit assisted living community. How many alerts might you typically get in a day?
Yeah, so a lot of it depends on the acuity. So when we look at facilities, we're in anywhere from skilled nursing and really high clinical areas all the way down to, independent living, which the answer in independent living might be 0, is what you're assuming, right? So anything in between, on typically we see, I think 1 to 3 falls a year is the traditional standard. All customized per resident depending on what their individual needs and care plan is. So the answer to that kind of changes depending on the need, but I can tell you our false positive is well under 1 per month per resident globally.
Okay, terrific. So I'm gonna, if you'll allow me, I want to go a little philosophical here. I was having this conversation last week with a friend of mine in the senior living industry. And he was telling me about this company that has this philosophy of trying to keep people almost alive as possible in every sense that they do. And I think that on a surface, you say, oh, man, that makes sense, right? But I'm actually not so sure in real life that that's as good as we think it is. My stepfather is past mid-stage dementia. He's very forgetful. His body is failing him. And he's in a community where there are 2 other residents who arguably they're much further down the road with their dementia as well. And I'm not sure that society or they would be better off to just keep them healthier and looking at those baselines as opposed to keeping them comfortable until their time comes. So do you have any thoughts about how to balance that? I mean, that's not what you're really selling, but it's an area I'm just thinking about a lot.
Yeah, I think that's where, I use the term agility a lot. If people hear me talk, and I think that's important with any technology or platform, because to your point, one person on their unfortunate dementia journey versus another can look dramatically different.
That's right.
So I think that's a very appropriate question. Actually was traveling this week visiting customers, and we had a client tell us that they have a client that's over 100 years old, is on hospice now. And they were able to actually, before they were ever alerted to the hospice, they could see it was coming, because over 3 months of the insights from Silver Shield, they were actually seeing the decline. And that allowed them, to look at the decisions very differently than if they were keeping the status quo, versus they could see, they knew what to check, they verified, and then they did take more of that stance of comfort rather than trying to be preventative in a case that it really wasn't going to yield the result. and and the family felt in that case that they actually gave much better care. So that's something we do look at, is empowering the people with it. And it's also why we don't diagnose. We're not a technology where we'll tell you what is happening, because there's too much subjectivity to that. But what we want to do is present the data to the people who can make those decisions, and then the care planner, for example, can decide, this is more of a comfort thing than a longevity one.
Yeah, so I really like that a lot. The idea that you sort of got, an early warning that things are maybe coming to an end. I sort of struggle thinking about that with my stepfather every day. I got an hour before we went on the air, I got a text message from the community saying that he'd had a really rough night and he was experiencing some pain. And so, and it's frankly, it's really hard. And maybe with your system, it will be better because it's just this point in time. So is that just a thing that's happening? Or if we had this radar in there, could we be looking at his behavior and say, yeah, that's not surprising because he's slowing down? So I actually really like that a lot. So here's the other question I want to ask relative to my stepfather. He's had a number of falls in his communities, and they've either been witnessed or were found essentially immediately because he's in a very small community. But half of those falls, or I think half of them, at least half of them have been outside his room. What about falls outside?
Yeah, so there's two ways I'll answer that. The first is, if they happen outside of a zone that we're observing, but they're able to get themselves, we'll see people like maybe they crawl into the bedroom from a closet, things like that. We have mechanisms in place where we can still catch those situations from happening, right? And we alert that we detect someone's been laid out on the floor extended period of time, didn't see the fall, we still can send an alert based on that, right? The other piece is we're, culturally at Pontosense, we're very collaborative. We're not someone who feels that there's a silver bullet and we've got it. So we work with a lot of partners. So those points, we actually do a lot of co-integrations on people. For example, a big partner in Finland that does GPS wearable watches. And that's exactly the use case there is. We're in the home, we're in the facilities, but when they leave, they go for a walk outside, whatever, that's where that partnership takes over, because now if they fall outside on the front porch, it's still caught, and that's still integrating through our system. So then our system and data all knows that happened.
So I have this big dream. I don't know whether you could do it with radar or how it could be done, but I have this vision of being able to put sensors like yours into common areas and being able to actually identify multiple people, be able to say who they are. Because again, he's out of his room most of the day. So how do you track that behavior? And it would seem like that could become super valuable. Is there any sense of being able to do that now or in the future?
Yeah, so there's the advantage and disadvantage to radar is privacy, right? There's a lot to be said for privacy. It's why we get put in bathrooms and bedrooms, but at the same time, I can't do like facial recognition. So we have other ways of tackling that, where, like I said, we either will through partnerships have other devices, other elements that play into that, especially for common areas, or we also are we're unlocking some more capabilities through Silver Shield, which is Bluetooth enabled, where we can actually use those Bluetooth devices to identify and tag individuals. That's how we do, for example, caregiver identification. We know that your nurse walked in based on the tag that's pinging off of Silver Shield. So that's kind of the way around that privacy concern, is where and when you want it, you have the ability to do it generally through like Bluetooth technology.
Okay, so let's talk. I think maybe we need to provide a little bit of clarity about Silver Shield and Proto. I'm not sure I'm saying it right. Pontosense?
Pontosense, yep.
Pontosense. Okay. Tell me about, are they the same product, the same company? Help me understand the differentiation and what each does.
Yeah, so Pontosense is the umbrella, if you will. So we have our automotive group, we have our age check group. We develop radar at our core.
Okay.
And then on the flips, and then in terms of what Silver Shield is our flagship kind of business to consumer product that we created that is designed to be put in those facilities or home.
Okay, very good. That's super helpful. So one of the things that, as I go to conferences, and I attend a lot of conferences, it's interesting. If you go through the trade show section, it's like, I don't know, 60, 70% today are technologies of various types. But I have discovered that, or it seems to me like every fourth booth or every fourth vendor is now doing some sort of sensor technology. It's kind of a crowded field, and everybody, of course, says they're the best. Talk to me a little bit about. So I'm an operator. That's who my audience is. But let's just assume I'm an operator, and I go to the Senior Living Executive Conference, which happens in 3 or 4 weeks, and I'm interested in sensors, and I walk in there, and there are 12 sensor companies. I don't know what the number is, but some number. How do I figure out the right one to pick for my community?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the first questions is always around the privacy piece, because that's where the decision has to come in. You're going to have limitations no matter how open you are. For example, cameras have been around a long time. Cameras are used in different applications, and they still very much have a place. That's why we also are big advocates for what we call sensor fusion. That's putting more than one together. And that's a lot of what you see at these trade shows. You're seeing people that are actually just taking existing sensors off the shelf and they're trying to put a software layer on top. And there's some that do that better than others. But then if you look at what those sensors are and how you choose, that's where you get into the adoption question. And that's where we see, particularly when residents have the ability to say yes, no, or like in homes, we do a lot of home care, for example, or it's in the facility. You see a lot of resistance to things like the cameras and audio listening devices, particularly in the bedroom and bathrooms, right? The real intimate areas. Yeah. And that's why we also oftentimes will say, well, that's why we collaborate with people who, to your earlier question, we'll put the radar in the intimate areas and the camera in the common area where that privacy is less concerning, right? So I think that's when you look at it, you have to understand the overall needs of the facility. What are your risk factors? Are you highly based on Alzheimer's patients who are apt to wander? Well, now you've got a security element. That's why we have things like our door entry exits, right? So you really have to understand, I think, the level of acuity and then understand that privacy piece, because that's really good, the kind of the math, if you will, I think.
Gotcha. So it is, can you talk to me a little bit about your cost, what it costs, or, or kind of how the business model works? I know sometimes people don't like to talk about price on air like this, and so I'm sensitive to that. But what's the business model?
Yeah, so I without going overly specific, I can tell you there's generally with us one of two things. We either will have large operators, you have your capital expenditure, which is quite affordable for each of the sensors, and then you do have a software fee, if you will, on a monthly basis. The unique thing with us is we don't force people into contracts. We don't have these multi-year agreements. So our product is very much, it's pay as you go. So our whole model is based on, if you install it, buy a device, you don't start paying until you install it, and then those things can be moved. So we have a lot of home care clients, for example, that will deploy it into a home, and 6 months later, they don't need that one active. They have a 2-month gap. They move it, and then they go back to paying. So that's our model, and it equates to, we always say it's basically like having a Netflix subscription. The cost is extremely accessible, and that's where I think we're deployed in 21 countries, and there was a reason for that, and it was how accessible we made this.
So is it a cost in a senior living setting? Is it a cost per building, a cost per device, a cost per resident?
Yeah, it's a cost per device, because we find just everyone's got different needs, different square footages, different coverage. If someone's bed down versus active, so that's why we try to come in and be very one-off, and then when we get into those discussions, we work with the facilities teams, the architects. We help them design the most efficient use as well, so you don't have redundancy.
Okay, great. And what about bathrooms? Does it need a separate sensor in the bathroom, or bedroom covers the bathroom? How does that work?
Yeah, typically people will put one in the bathroom. They're generally, unless they're open to each other, which is not typical, we always suggest putting one in the bathroom itself, because you can get really meaningful insights. Typically, a deployment for us is a bedroom, a bathroom, and a primary living space, and that captures about 90% of the fall risk and activities. You go into some larger square footage, maybe more luxury style facilities. Then our average goes up to like 5 to 8 when they're getting full coverage.
Got it. Okay, perfect. That's great. So, again, in a senior living setting, as a family caregiver, do I have access to all of the data, or do I have to get it from the community? Is there a dashboard, any notion of that, or how do people handle that? How does that work?
I mean, it's all of the above. It's all very dependent on the customer. We have facilities who hold on to the data very tightly. They don't want the families having the visibility because we do live view. You open our app, you'll see the live view of where the person is, what they're doing, what their breathing rate is when they're in bed, things like that. Yeah. We have other facilities. We have one today we're kicking off, in fact, where they very intently are giving the families view only access to each of the tenants so they can see how dad's doing on a daily basis, check in. And then you see everything in between where some just get the reports we generate and everything else. But I'd say it's usually on the facility base, it tends to not have the families as involved actively. Yeah. On the home care side, it's the other side of that coin. We definitely see a lot of use there.
Yeah. To me, it actually seems like from a marketing standpoint, giving access would be a huge selling point for families, even though my guess is that after then, probably in the first 2 or 3 weeks, they'd look a lot. And then after that, they'd like, oh man, I haven't looked at what's going on with dad for 6 months now. Right. So, but I can see some benefits there. One of the questions I always like to ask people, and maybe makes you a little bit uncomfortable. Jada says I don't ask uncomfortable questions. That's not always true. As you've been developing this technology, particularly for older people, do you have a failure story that you learned that you can talk to me about?
I mean, I think we don't usually say fail because I think if you're not breaking things, you're not innovating, right? So usually those are the best opportunities for learning. I mean, I think early on, one of the things I'll tell you is very early on in our journey, we weren't putting the device in the position that we do now. We're the only company in the world that puts it in the corner at the height it does. And that's a very key point. It's very, very hard technically to generate your algorithms around that. And that's why not a lot of people are doing it. But that's where we tried to be more of a, hey, I think we can do this better when you're looking at like a tabletop form factor, for example. And we just realized that physics gets in the way sometimes. And that was a bit of a moment where we just had this philosophical awakening of saying, we need to actually just do what we know is right and the market will respond. And it did. There's a lot of training you have to do. But once people see the results, then it becomes a no-brainer.
That's terrific. Okay. So I'm an operator. I'm watching the show. I think, I got a few falls, but we kind of stay on top of them. What are the questions I should be asking myself in terms of evaluating whether I should be talking to you or not?
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the questions are, what do you really know is going on at night? For example, nighttime observation is a big thing. And what do you think is going on? Because those two things generally are not the same. And we see this all the time. We had a facility recently that was adopting us, and they had a resident who was a little resistant. The family was like, you don't need to put it in there. And they said, well, look, we're going to do it. It's going to do all these great things. You see the insights. And they said, well, he doesn't even get up out of bed at night. There's no real risk here. The first night they put it in, they looked the next day. He was out of bed 4 times. This continued for 3 days. And the third night he fell at night, and they caught it because of the device. And that was a bit of okay, maybe we don't know what we think we knew, because you do get a lot of challenges of communication, right, with these residents often. So that's something where once you actually have an ability to, detect what's happening versus what you think is happening, that's really the people part of it that we have to do.
Yeah, it's a really an important question, right? Because I often wonder how often falls happen in resident units where they don't have detection. They're able to get themselves back up and into bed, and the community never knows about it. And I think that there are lots of times in life where ignorance is bliss. I don't think falls in your community is one of those times. I think knowing about that is super, super important. One of the things that, and again, this becomes very personal to me, and maybe it's philosophical, maybe I think there's a technical element that you might be able to address. So as I told you, my stepfather's had, in the last 3 months, he's probably had 4 falls. And one of the reasons he's had those falls is because we've made a very conscious decision that we want him to have as much freedom of movement as possible. So he does use a walker. Yesterday, when I was there to see him following a fall that took place a couple of days ago, we had a discussion about a wheelchair, and the community rightfully says, well, maybe we should go to a wheelchair rather than a walker because it will keep him safer. And my response was that at least for today, I'd rather take the risk of the fall with the walker because I just think it makes him more, it gives him better freedom and freedom of choice and movement than he would have otherwise. But as we look at this data coming in, how do we make sure we don't, it's not quite the right word, but I'm not putting a better word on it. How do we make sure we don't overtreat and overprotect?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's largely what a part of our insights are designed to do is we want to look at changes in mobility, right? Because we see that all the time. In January, maybe he isn't a fall risk. Yeah, they're using a walker, but they're pretty stable. They're getting in and out of chairs fine. They just need some assistance versus, you 6 months later, something's changed and you're seeing a huge degradation. You want to know that and be able to make the intelligent decision. And that's also where it's not easy enough to just take one data point to know that am I overprotecting or not. That's why you guys see all these observations and behaviors. You even see people if they're sleeping longer, they're spending more time on the couch, they're getting more lethargic. That's a key indicator of behavior changes, right?
Yeah. And of course, ultimately it's a judgment call, it's a philosophical call, it's a family call as to when you take those additional steps. And I'm in the middle of having to decide those, and I don't have really clear answers. I've got some ideas about it, but I'm also recognizing that I know the community would love to see him in a wheelchair because it would protect them. But all I ultimately care about is his safety. But again, maybe he'd be actually happier in doing that. So they're very, very difficult questions. And so I guess really for me, we've talked a lot about protection. We've talked a little bit of sort of the context of privacy, about quality of life. But I'm gonna take one more run at this at a little different angle. Is if I came to you and I said, all I really care about is giving my residents the best possible quality of life. How are you going to make my residents' quality of life better? What would you tell me?
Yeah, I think number one, we're going to catch those critical situations like a fall. That's front and foremost. If you can't catch a fall, you're leaving the biggest risk factor out of there, right? Second piece of it is we're going to give you more insights without being invasive. So now the resident's not going to feel like you're invading. You're not prying. You're not having to even ask certain questions. You don't have to go every 2 hours, do your rounds, bother them, wake them up at night with a flashlight in their face, right? You can look at your dashboard, see that they're in bed, they're asleep, and see how their breathing patterns look. So I think that those are two of the most key and critical things we can do is we can give you the data you need without you having to pull it in a challenging situation. We can catch those critical alarms when they happen. And ultimately, what we want to then try to do for the facility is reduce that friction that you do get between residents and staff as much as possible without giving up anything around the safety element.
Outstanding. So we are about out of time. Talk to me a little bit about how people get in touch with you, how they find you, and what their next steps might be if they want to explore what you're doing.
Yeah, no. So we have channel partners all around the world. Like I said, we just deployed our 21st country. So you'll see us all over the place. You can go to pontosense.com. You can fill out a form there. You can email us at info@pontosense.com and get in touch with our team that way. And you'll probably see us at most age tech related shows, home care shows, long-term care as well. So don't be shy about stopping us there either.
Terrific. Travis, thank you so much for joining me. The world of technology and aging is changing so fast. It's making the lives of older people better. It's making the lives of team members better. It's certainly protecting owners and operators. So this has been a great conversation. I love what you're doing. If you're part of the audience, you should take a look at this technology as something that could make your communities better, make the lives of your residents better, and make the lives of your team members better. When you have happy team members, everything is better, right?
Yep. No, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Travis. Have a great week. We'll be back with you on Friday with another great show.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having us on here, Steve. It was a great conversation. We appreciate it.